Hi everyone. So in the last video, we went through what the problem is with Next.js caching at the moment. Now in this one, I wanted to show you a solution. I wanted to show you how Remix does this thing a lot better. So let's go to the drawing board again and explore what was wrong with Next.js. So we were looking at these schematic diagrams here. And I explained that while Next.js did have some revalidation features related to caching, it doesn't have client revalidation, it only has server revalidation. What that means is that when you're fetching data from the client, it doesn't have any way, there's no way that you can ask Next.js to refetch that data upon a certain component rendering. This means that data will get out of date in your app when the user traverses through it. Things like if they have deleted some item from their shopping cart, in the next screen, that item will magically appear again. And I showed this in my last video how a random number was static. It was not being regenerated. What I'll do in this video is try to show you Remix and how that fixes the issue. And I'll also give you an introduction to Remix as well. So Remix is just like Next.js. It's a front-end and back-end solution to render out your JavaScript pages. It uses React just like Next.js, and you can essentially get started with it. It's very similar to Next.js in the way that the loaders and the navigation works. There are a few subtle differences, but we'll cover that in this video as well. So the easiest way to create a new Remix app is just to go npm create remix at latest. So I'll just do that now. And I've created a new folder as well here. So I'll just put it into that folder. We'll just wait for the dependencies to install, and I'll switch over to the VS Code, my bad. So you can see here, I've given it some configuration options and the dependencies have been installed. The next thing is for us to go into the folder. So we can go code dot to open it up. Awesome. So this is the main file. How Remix works is that we have an app directory, and inside the app directory, there's a root.tsx file. This is kind of the header file where you specify any metadata and lay out your entire app. There's also a routes directory, and the routes directory works in a very specific way, which is a little bit different to Next.js. Let me go into Edge and show you how the routes directory works. So there's two versions of the route file naming. I prefer the first version because it does folder sorting a little bit more. In the second version, I didn't quite see any kind of ways to do folder sorting. I really used to like the pathless routes feature because it would let you organize your directory. But in this case, they've just made it a dot path traversal, which doesn't really help me to organize my files. So I prefer the V1. I mean, that might change in the future, but we will go with V1 for now as it's the most stable version. So pathless routes here, pretty self-explanatory. You just do an underscore, and then you can make a pathless route there. Anyway, let's hop back into VS Code and let's start coding. So this is just a simple template, but what we're going to do is we're going to make something very similar to what we did in the last video for Next.js. Before we do anything, I just want to run pnpm run dev to make sure everything's working correctly. Awesome, we are up and running. So this is the welcome to Remix page. We're going to do a little experiment on here to make sure that we are doing server-side rendering and not serving a static page to the users. We're always revalidating the data from our data source so that we can get the most up-to-date information to the users. This is really valuable for things like e-commerce or a shopping experience. You can also do it for any other application. A lot of applications require server-side rendering, so this is great for that. Let's go into here, and I want to do a couple of things in here. So firstly, I want a function which runs on the server. And I also want a function to run on the client, and I want to compare the behavior between the two. In order to do the one on the server, you do const loader, and then you can asynchronously load the data from the server. Now what I'm going to load is just a random number. So let let me do that. And let's wait for 1 second before we resolve that and give the answer. Now it's complaining that loader is not being called, which is correct. So let's specify a function in here to get the answer for us. So to do that, we'd say use loader data. And then the type is just going to be type of the loader. So that just takes the type right from there. Now I'm also going to specify another random number on the client. So client random number, and that is actually going to be a use state. So let me do something. There you go, something like that. And then we can have a use effect here. Awesome. Now, I just wanted to check that this thing, we do notice that we are not passing in any parameters here. This means that this function is only going to be executed when this component loads. And every time this component loads again, so anytime it's mounted, that function will run again. So now that all that's left to do is just render these out. So let me render out the loaded server random number. And I'll also render out the client. Oh, one quick thing we forgot was to do a dot traversal on one crucial other thing. You need to export this constant. I didn't do that. Oops, I added a second one here for some reason. So I'm just going to remove that. And then that resolves to random number. Perfect. Let me go to the browser and show you. So there's two different random numbers now. And every time I refresh the page, the random numbers refresh. One of them is loaded on the server and the other one is loaded on the client, which we will show. We can see this when we go to the page source. So if we go to the source, you can see that that one is loaded on the server and then this div is empty. And that's the one that's filled when it's on the client. Now let's do some client-side routing. So let me go to this cart page that I created in the past and go export default function cart. And return, just go like this first, and then do that. And oops, sorry, I forgot to show you the code, but essentially I just created a new function with cart there. So let's go into cart. Okay, so when we go into cart, we just simply get a page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just direct us back to the original page. So let me go back to code. I'll create a link, call it go back home, and then link it to the main page. And then when I'm on the main page, I'm going to have another button here or a link here saying go to cart. Perfect. So there you go. We've now got a link to go back home and a link to go to cart. Awesome. And these are all client-side links, so it loads in the background. And you'll see that when I'm going to cart, it's instant. But when I'm going back home, it has to wait a second because that's part of the loading function. But what you also see is that pay attention to this number here. Changes every time. Both the numbers change every time. Of course they do, because the client-side one is re-rendered and the server-side one is also rendered again on the server. That's what causes the 1 second delay. So the other cool thing about Remix is that you can actually use the use transition hook in order to make a loading state. So I'm going to quickly do that as well. It seems like they're actually updating it to use navigation. So let's use that. We're going to put in use navigation up here. So const navigation. I'm just going to return a text with the word loading. Now I'm going to save that and let's go back to Edge. So now I'm going to refresh the page and when I go back home, awesome. So what happened was it turned out that we needed to use it in the cart and not the one that you're going to. So we'll probably abstract this into one of the root classes and then it should be used everywhere. But essentially all it is a use navigation and then you verify that the state is loading and return the loading spinner. So if I go into my browser again, I go into the cart, it takes me here. Then when I go back home, there's a little loading icon which tells the user to wait for whatever's coming. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Remix is really awesome and it lets you almost the parts where Node.js blocks you and doesn't allow you to do what is expected in this sort of situation, Remix just flies through because it is a server-side language. It's designed for server-side rendering. So whereas I feel Next.js is a bit more of a bloggy and static web pagey kind of language. So that might be why Next.js didn't foresee this to be an issue, whereas Remix has it well covered. So awesome. Thanks so much for stopping by. Cheers.